are conditions where reliance becomes a limitation. In those conditions, priority shifts towards control of what's already in place. And from then on, there's no going back. We define what comes next, on our own ground, on our own terms, starting right now.
Thank you.
Wow, amazing. So great to be here, everyone, and thanks so much for coming out. I feel like we have had some incredible conversations already this morning. It's a bit of a tough act to follow, but here we are to talk about sovereignty. And really, like, if we were having this panel 3 years ago, I think this would have been primarily a policy conversation. But now in this country, we have some incredible companies building the tech, the products, and really innovating in these areas. We have an entire capital stack set up to support these companies. And there's lots of conversations I have with entrepreneurs and with policymakers about sovereignty, why we care about this. And the thing that stands out to me is that nobody really has a common definition of what we mean when we talk about sovereignty. And so that's kind of what I wanted to start with this panel, is what are we even talking about when we say we're building sovereign tech, we need sovereign tech in Canada? And I thought I'd actually start with you, Eliot, to tell us a little bit more about how you think about that at Dominion. You've been around for just less than a year. You've raised over $23 million, scaling super fast. And you've recently been appointed to the US-Canada Committee on Economic Relations. And so I know you're hearing lots of different perspectives in this space, but kick it over to you. What does sovereignty mean to you?
Well, thanks for having me. It's super exciting being here and seeing so many technologists and entrepreneurs, and honored to be on such an awesome panel. I guess the way the government thinks about sovereignty is really protecting people, keeping them safe, and protecting borders. I think the way that Dominion thinks about it is kind of comes out of military doctrine, something called the OODA loop, basically observe, orient, decide, and act. We're principally focused on the O on the beginning and the A on the end. So how do you observe? How do you own the assets to observe what the heck is happening? In the Arctic, we have 230,000 kilometers of coastline. We really have no idea what's going on. And then how do you act on what you observe? And technology has massive roles to play on both of those. The orient and decide is principally a sort of organizational and political thing, but we're focused on the kind of bookends of that.
Great. And Mina, Kepler Communications is doing a lot of innovative stuff in the space sector. How do you, when you think about sovereignty and building a sovereign company, what does that mean to you, and how do you think about that?
So I think the way we end up seeing it with a lot of our government customers, sovereignty oftentimes quickly turns into a question of control and freedom of action. Those are kind of the two priority areas. Can I do what I want to do without any encumbrances? And do I have the opportunity to control my assets, control my space? And those are the two kind of bookends that we think about oftentimes from a sovereign perspective. And there's a lot of these concepts from sovereignty that doesn't come down to, in fact, ownership of physical goods, assets, or hardware. And we've seen sovereign mechanisms at play, because ownership of everything is just entirely impractical, where people go out and have contractual mechanisms. A great example of that is DPAS ratings in the US, where you go out and you can prioritize a program. They can hit a button and say, this is DPAS rated, and you need to prioritize the delivery of any of your goods and services to us first.
And it's interesting, like when you look at a company like Kepler, in fact, when we were talking about this backstage, you are building a lot in Canada. You recently launched with SpaceX's Falcon 9 in January. And so we're not, when I look at Kepler, I'm thinking this is a Canadian company doing some amazing things in Canada, but you're not only building in Canada. You are relying on other elements of the global supply chain.
Yeah, it's completely impractical for us to kind of own everything because to replicate the reliability and reuse of a Falcon 9 rocket is just something that's going to take you 10 to 20 years to go do, and you'll be prioritizing the whole of your business around that. Or to replicate the incredible lasers and optics that they built out in Germany, that's something that'll take another decade to produce. So you have to be practical about it from a sovereign perspective and really narrow it down to control and freedom of action. And from our perspective, we end up finding that a lot of customers are pretty comfortable. If you can show them control, show them freedom of action, then they get pretty confident. But we have a factory still here in Toronto where we manufacture satellites in downtown Toronto because we need that for our own control and freedom of action.
And Nick, we've got you here with Cohere. Congratulations on the recent deal with Aleph Alpha in Germany. When you think about sovereignty, I'm curious to get your perspective. I mean, AI is obviously a topic that is on the tip of everyone's tongues. When you go to Ottawa and you're talking to policymakers about AI, there's lots of different perspectives. I think a lot of excitement and energy to, to support and build up companies like Cohere so that we can have sovereign AI and control over that in our country. When you're looking at it from a builder's perspective and what you're focused on at Cohere, what does that mean to you? Do you view Cohere as a sovereign company, a sovereign tech company in Canada?
Yeah, I think sovereignty is fundamentally what we provide. But I think about it maybe a little broader than some of the conversation already. Like when I think about sovereignty, really I just mean agency and autonomy. Like we use the word sovereignty a lot, but really I just mean agency and autonomy. And I don't mean that just for a country. I know like the word sovereignty is also thought of only as something a country has, but I think sovereignty is something that can happen at all spatial scales, like a person, a group of people, a company, a country, and every one of those can have autonomy and agency, and technology can either be a force that provides that for them, that gives them more autonomy, more agency, more of an ability to do what they're interested in, and free up their time and things, or it can be a force that locks them down. And we've seen that technology lock people down and take away their sovereignty a lot over the past 20 years. And we've seen technology and hegemony of technology remove sovereignty from companies, remove sovereignty from countries. And I think AI right now, like as a technology, it can kind of go one of two ways. It can either be a technology that empowers people, or similarly to mobile phones and the internet, it can be something that a lot of people feel fundamentally disempowers them. So yeah, I really want LLMs to be something that people think empowers them, that companies think empowers them, that countries subsequently think empowers them, but the tech has to be built and deployed in the right way in order for it to go that way. So that's something that we're thinking about all the time at Cohere.
And what is the right way?
For me, the right way is open. It's one in which the models are released for people to use and to run locally. It's one in which it can be deployed privately and on-prem so that people can run it on real data, and it can be controlled by that organization or person that's using it, and it can't be shut off by whoever made the model. So for us, we just released. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take it. Thank you. Yeah. So we just released our most recent model open source. We've been releasing our models with open weights for the entire time of this company. So if anybody wants to look at the weights of the models we make, they're out there. And we do that because I think that that pushes it into the direction of sovereignty enabling for people, for companies, for countries.
Yeah. It is interesting because when I think about sovereignty and sovereign tech, I really and Toby was up on stage earlier talking a little bit about this, around how we need to fundamentally build globally competitive companies. And I worry sometimes that our conversation about sovereign tech indexes a little bit towards protectionism and building Canadian tech in Canada only for Canadian companies and sort of protecting that within a bubble. I know that's not the perspective of everyone on stage here, but let's dive into that a little bit. Eliot, I see you smiling, so I'll kick it over to you. Where on the spectrum should we land from, protected, subsidized sectors to, something totally open and globally competitive? Like, what should we be aiming for across that stack?
I have high conviction about what we need to protect, and those are technologies and institutions that protect our right to have a country, protect our fundamental sovereignty and dignity and right to exist. So like just back to this OODA loop of like, do we have the capability to observe what is happening in this country on the borders? And do we have the ability to act on those actions of those things that we observe? But I actually think that countries that talk a lot about sovereignty have like a fundamental anxiety about keeping it. And one of the things I would like us to go back to, and what Dominion is trying to kind of rebuild, is we didn't really talk about sovereignty in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but we built amazing stuff. We built the first passenger jet. We built the first 2 operational drones. We built the first autonomous submarine. We built incredible stuff. And we got our sovereignty through excellence and ambition, and actually generated the leverage with not just the Americans, but the global community by building incredible stuff. And we did that because we had a customer. So I'm not sure if like the protection is the right way to think about it. The minimum thing that we need is a competent, capable customer in the government. I'm not asking for protection. I want to beat Anduril. I want to beat Helsing. I want to beat Lockheed. But I am asking for a competent, capable, rapid customer. That is like a fundamental requirement, I think, of getting back to that ambition.
How is it trying to get governments in Canada, both, I mean, mostly I think you're working with federal government, but maybe provinces as well. How are those conversations? How is it going with, trying to navigate that and convincing, government to be that first customer? Because I do hear this a lot that, and it's not just in these sectors represented on stage, but, a lot of companies, I think, have a challenging time in Canada because they go and try to sell to government, and the first question is, well, like, who else have you sold to globally? And so there's this idea that to be successful in Canada, you need to go prove yourself globally first, and then you'll be able to get government as a customer here. But Mina, how is that going for you, and what are you seeing?
So I think our story arc is pretty similar. We started the business, we raised capital from the US, we sell to the US as our first customer, then we go sell to Europe as our second customer, and we come back to Canada and say, okay, now we're a qualified entity. And even at that point in time, I think Eliot and I wrote a memo together for Build Canada, where we note that the average procurement cycle is 16 and a half years. So 16 and a half years.
16 and a half years?
Yes. So, yeah, so if you even think about that conceptually, that's beyond the lifespan of any company starting up to ever care about government as a user. This just becomes like an afterthought that maybe sometime in the far-off future, they can become a user. And that procurement reform is live and vibrant in both the US and Europe. We're seeing some early innings of it in Canada, where there's willingness to make change. But I think by default, because of the nature of the environment we're in, we have to be globally competitive. Like the US Space Force has to pick us above local domestic company, and it's a performance orientation above anything else. The Europeans, who have a well-regulated economy, also have to make that same decision. But if you're performant on a global basis, then they're willing to work with you. And we have to see some of that same reform happen in Canada, because otherwise, founders in this room are just not going to care about some project that's going to take 16 and a half years. They'll go find another problem that's going to be interesting to them.
So do you think overall that Buy Canadian policies are helping or hurting?
I think it's way less about Buy Canadian policies. I think it's all around, having these competent customers, like Eliot mentioned, in government who come in and say, hey, I'm willing to buy a good from you. And they have air cover or policy air cover to go make that decision, even though it may work out well or poorly. And it doesn't have to be a large procurement scale. It's got to be with a linear pathway or a step function pathway that somebody can go in and say, okay, you have a product, in our case, like data from space. I'm willing to buy $1 million worth of it. If it works, I'm going to buy 5. If it works, I'm going to buy 10. If it works, I'm going to actually put you on this pathway towards a many $100 million program with us. And that mentality has to creep in because oftentimes we see there's just a risk aversion. Like even if I spend $1 million with you and it doesn't work out well, like that's going to be, that's going to compromise my next promotion. And that mentality really has to shift.
Yeah. What are you seeing, Nick, in your conversations around procuring AI within government? Are you seeing a shift in that mentality, or is it sort of more status quo?
Yeah, I think 16 years is the average procurement cycle. That's crazy. I didn't know that. That's crazy. We're not seeing that. I think I'm seeing in the government right now and in public institutions a lot of interest in trying to get the benefits of large language models. This is my first company. This will be my only company. So I don't know if that's normal, but certainly I'm seeing a lot of excitement and interest and a need for speed. And I think that's because the technology is kind of like obviously useful in a way.
Yeah.
So we've been lucky to be able to build a tech that lots of organizations feel urgency to deploy.
Yeah. And so, as you're building these incredible sovereign companies in Canada, you're all in industries that require immense amounts of capital as you scale and grow. I would love to spend a few minutes kind of diving into that. Obviously we don't have to get into confidential details here on stage about your specific trajectory and raises, but in terms of actually accessing the capital, if you were to need to raise $1 billion, is that even available here in Canada? How do you think about that? And does taking money from outside of Canada impact how you think of yourselves as a sovereign company?
Can I just jump back to the last question? I think we need to buy Canada. I get what Mina's saying, but every other country in the world that wants to have a defense industry buys their own stuff. It's just such an obvious thing to me. The Americans privilege it, the Israelis, the Koreans. The reason the Koreans are selling us stuff is because they bought their own stuff. So we have the capacity to do it. We have the desire. We have now the leadership to do it. I think we do have to buy our stuff. And maybe it's not going to be world class today, but the whole point of buying our stuff is that you generate the incentive systems so that it's world class tomorrow and the day after that. So I think we really do need to buy our own stuff. And it doesn't mean, and that is not a synonym for buying things that are not world class. We have built world class stuff. We can build world class stuff again. On the capital stuff, we have, the top 8 institutional investors here are the same as the Americans, $2.5 trillion. For the life of me, I actually am not really sure why we don't force them to buy stuff from Canadians. We should. It's obvious, again, that we should tell the pension funds to invest in Canadian companies. That's what successful countries do.
So you're supportive of a mandate for
100% I am. Yes.
Yeah. What percentage would you deem acceptable? If we were going to tell pension funds in Canada, hey, you guys need to spend X percent of your pools to support Canadian companies, what is the right amount?
I think the math would be the Prime Minister wants to grow the defense industry threefold in 10 years. That's roughly $30 billion. So the pensions should invest at minimum $30 billion in the Canadian defense industry, which is damn near nothing to them. That's definitely something I'm pro. I actually haven't had a hard time raising capital in Canada. Maybe it's a moment in time, but Canadians want to invest in it. Canadians on docks in Halifax, where I'm from in Victoria, give a shit about their defense industry and care about sovereignty. That is slowly trickling up into Bay Street, but I think the Canadians, the Main Street really cares about it.
Mina?
I couldn't agree more. I don't know what else to say. I wanted to applaud too. So from our perspective, again, my story arc was a little bit different. Raise capital from the US, come back to Canada. That's kind of the story. we're seeing a shift now. There is wildly renewed interest from Canadian investors for the defense sector, for sovereign applications. It's something I have never witnessed before. I think, most of the time I wouldn't have thought about raising capital in Canada. My default, and even if you talk to most of your peer groups, they tell you if you want to be a capital-intensive business to raise lots of capital, you're going to go to the US. But it's changed. Now we have active dialogues with Canadian-based investors, and that's not something I would have thought about a year ago.
Yeah. It is actually interesting, just to go back to the procurement thing for 1 second here, that Dominion has, what I would say quite a unique approach to the procurement model. And maybe there's other companies doing it as well. I mean, you tell me, but if we were to think about defense procurement in particular, and Nick, I'm curious on the AI side of things, but previously, what would happen is that the government would sort of spec out exactly what they wanted in a great amount of detail, and companies would bid for that. And what Dominion is doing is so innovative because you're actually kind of co-deploying or forward deploying with the Canadian Armed Forces to learn, before any procurement has even happened, to learn and iterate in real time. And I'm not sure what Cohere is doing on that front, but I would actually just love to kind of have a bit of a conversation around that and hear your perspective on how is that going, and is that a new model of procurement in this country?
TBD on how it's going. Ask me. Ask me in a couple of months. On some level, I don't really care. I know it's the right thing to do. I'm going to continue to do it. The warfighter needs it. The reality is technology is not being developed in a box in Waterloo, Hamilton, wherever the hell. It's being developed on the field with the soldier. We went into this 90-day OODA trial with essentially a tactical mesh network that went through 200 dot updates, 4 fundamental refactors at the back end, and it ended up in essentially a common operating picture that now sits somewhere in D&D. And I would not have known what they wanted unless I had co-developed them, unless we had that kind of customer intimacy that I think every other military, if you look what's happening in Ukraine, they're doing software updates, but they're actually doing 50 to 60 hardware updates on a monthly basis, hardware updates. So, we can't have 16
50 to 60 hardware updates?
Hardware updates to
How does that even work?
Drones. If you look at the drone, there's an Amazon marketplace for buying drones. The military can buy drones off their version of Amazon. There are close to 1,000 different types of drones. Those drones change every single day. It is such a dynamic environment that we're nowhere close to, but we need to get closer to it.
Nick, what are you are you co-developing or co-deploying anything, or is is Cohere's model more in the traditional procurement?
No, so we use forward deployed engineers as well, and a big part of what we do when we're working with a big organization is take our model and our agentic framework for using it, and we put it securely in their environment, but then it needs to be connected to their data so that it's actually useful. Right? So if you just have a large language model and it doesn't have access to your internal documentation, that's not very useful. So you can imagine a bank or something, maybe they have a big HR repository, and they have a bunch of a big database of all the documents about the companies they're tracking or something. And when we deploy into an organization of that size, we'll have some forward deployed engineers come along and write little connectors so that the language model can access whatever data it needs to in that environment in a secure way. And so that's a very standard part of our playbook. That's a little bit like co-developing, right? We're figuring out, hey, what connectors are particularly useful for this environment, and then we figure out, hey, what does the model need to be better at in order to be particularly useful for this administrative task or something. But it's not quite the degree of of hardware updates being shipped every day.
Yeah. And we talked about capital from external sources outside of Canada. If you just did a deal with acquiring a German company, like how do you think about that as you're building a sovereign AI company in Canada? Like how do you think about partnerships globally and capital globally, and like does that impact how sovereign you are as a company, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so we've raised...
It's not a trick question.
No.
Just, like,
we've raised a lot of capital. And training large language models is enormously capital intensive.
Yeah.
That's true, and the reason for that is you have to pay for compute, you have to pay for data, and you have to pay for a very talented and rarefied group of engineers. So it's enormously capital intensive. We have raised a lot of money from outside of Canada, the vast majority of it. But we have had lead investors who have often been Canadian. We've been really lucky to work with PSP, with Radical, with Inovia, with a bunch of great Canadian investors who are often ahead of the curve. So there's a great investment community here, and there is a lot of capital, but a lot of it is deployed elsewhere. And so even as a Canadian company that has always been here, that will always stay here, we have had to go all over the world to raise the capital that we need to train models. I don't think that makes us any less sovereign. In many ways, that has given us roots into the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is increasingly interested in getting technology outside of China and America. So we have a presence in Asia, we have customers in Europe, in the Middle East, like all over the world. And in part, us raising money and being out there has given us connections, and then that has helped facilitate those commercial relationships. And that has enabled us to build a better Canadian company grounded here. So no, I don't see those two things as a trade-off, but it is an interesting situation that a company that is, our roots are here, I live here, we all live here, we're solidly Canadian.
Yeah.
There's no way for us to build what we're building without raising a huge amount of money outside of Canada.
Yeah. I mean, when people think of Cohere, I think they automatically think like you're Canadian, you're Canadian first. I'm actually, I was not aware of like the scale of your global footprint, so it's super interesting to hear about your customer base.
All over,
in Asia
all over
and
the
Europe
world.
And, yeah.
Yeah. And increasingly, with the Aleph Alpha thing, we're increasingly having a presence in Europe, and that's something Europe is very interested in. They're very interested in having more technological partners and people to buy from outside of the technological hegemony of the world.
Yeah. Is Kepler finding this as well, Mina?
Yeah. So we're also pretty capital intensive, just from the perspective of building, launching stuff into space, and we've got the majority of our investors are American or European, with a few, I'd say, outliers that are Canadian. And I think in our context, we have to be a little more cautious when it comes to things like security clearances. So to hold security clearances in Canada or in the US, there's a kind of a process loop that you have to run through to be successful there, and that implies you have to be selective on the investor base. And make sure that those investors are seen as NATO or allied nations that support the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, like very clearly from, like, just to tie it all together here, is that sovereignty doesn't come from protected industries or protected companies or overly subsidized companies. What we're really talking about is building, world-class, globally competitive companies that can not only serve Canadian customers, but that can serve global markets as well. Yeah.
No, I think it comes from privileging.
From what, sorry?
I think it's a timescale thing. Like, you don't want to protect shitty companies. Nobody wants that. But you want to privilege young companies that have ambition, have talent, have capability, like these two. Like, hell yeah, I will sacrifice my pension return to make sure that Nick and Mina grow $10 billion companies, and I think a lot of other people would do that as well, because I know it actually isn't sacrificing return, because they have the talent, they have the capability. But privileging in the beginning, I think, is really important.
Privileging, yeah, I like that. What's one part of the sovereignty stack in Canada that, from your perspective, nobody is building that we should be building as a country?
We just need more nuclear power plants.
Nuclear power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been great progress. There's great work on like small nuclear reactors.
totally.
But like I look at the app all the time that says how much power we're generating on Ontario, and we're like 55% nuclear, and like we could be 100.
Which app is that?
Oh,
That's
there's
Ontario
Grid
Power
Watch.
Generation?
Yeah, Grid Watch. It like shows you.
Okay.
It's awesome. It's lovely. We could be. We have a huge, excellent like turbines for water. So we're at like, I don't know, close to like 85% like renewable, but we could be at 100% renewable, and I think that'd be something I'd love to see that across the country. We can have more green energy, and that's going to give us more independence as a country.
I would love to see a national app like that where we could just see the energy, like electricity generation across the country at any given time. That would be super cool.
Yeah.
I think nuclear power is a great idea. I also think missiles and energetics is also a good idea. But yeah, nuclear power is great.
I'd love to see a sovereign chip fab.
Chip fab, yeah.
There was an announcement recently with the Canadian Photonics Fabrication Center in
Yep.
Ottawa. I might be getting the name
Privatizing
wrong.
the-
What do you
yeah.
think about that?
I think it's a really good move. Like they're going to privatize it and then leave it up to industry to go out and say, how do we make this into a really productive outcome on decades of research and development? We saw the bad side of that on the space sector. So they had this facility called David Florida Labs, must have invested $500 million to $1 billion a year into it, and world class, one of 5 facilities, and they elected to hold it privately, which meant it was losing a bunch of money without being well utilized. And they were about to shut it down. Fortunately, the government decided to change their mind on that, but that took like a 2-year disruption in the industry, and people started doing other things. So now they're handing it over to private industry to try and manage it on a profitable, efficient basis, and I think we're going to see huge global demand inbound as a result.
If we were, I know we're kind of running short on time here, so I'll maybe start to close it here, but if you were sitting in this room 3 years ago, kind of knowing what you know now, what is kind of like one thing you wish somebody had told you about building this kind of company in Canada? You know, whether it's about customers or capital or procurement, working with government, you know, like, what do you wish you knew sooner that you've maybe learned along the way?
3 years ago would have been better not to be in Canada, which is the unfortunate. I think that's it's true. I'm sorry, but I think that's my take on it. It's different now. Now I really believe, like firmly, it's a huge advantage to be a Canadian company.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't have done it. I would have waited until Carney, basically.
The only thing that comes to mind is a bunch of technological things. But like, I wish I knew about the data efficiency of reinforcement learning. But that's,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's quite the answer you were looking for.
All answers are good answers on this stage. I'm not looking for one particular, but cool. I think like the last question I had, maybe just for each of you, is just like looking for one sentence each on, you know, one bet that you're making in 2026 or over the next year that most people in this room are not thinking about or not aware of. Like, what's one bet you're making in your business?
What was the question, sorry?
What's one bet you're making in 2026?
I thought I went first last time. I need time to think of something smart.
Mina, I can. Yeah, I mean, one bet we're making is we're open sourcing our models, right? Like we just released an Apache 2.0 model.
Nice.
Thank you. And that's certainly a bet. Thank you.
I love that.
And the reason for that is that when we took a look at our customers, like we're the deployment of the model, the connections, the agentic framework for using it, the search stack, all the stuff we sell to make sure the technology is actually really useful, is a huge value add. And the model itself, although it is the main thing that we're delivering, it's by no means the extent of our value add. So we're confident that allowing people to use it and build on it is going to result in more business for us. And it's going to enable people to trust us to build more sovereign, providing technology for them as people, and to like understand the utility of the models we're building. So that's definitely a risk, And we've been doing it for research purposes, but not an Apache 2 yet. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm feeling quite good about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that goes for you guys.
Yeah.
I'm making a bet on Canada. Like, I don't care about anything else. I hope Canada takes a risk on me. Yeah, we're building a company to rebuild the defense industry in Canada so that we can be a global leader and that we can engage in geopolitics, that we can engage in warfare, that we can engage in anything that comes in the future with more leverage, more capacity, more leadership. That's the bet we're making.
So I think we're making the same bet that it's Europe and Canada will be the priority markets, not the US for us in growth.
I love it. Those are some great bets. They're ambitious, they're bold, they're Canada first, and so I think that's a great place to end it off. Thank you, everyone, for all of your work and for the conversation.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.